You're listening to the Just Sayin podcast, offering conversations with experts that will educate, inform, and entertain. Here's your host of the Just Sayin podcast, Charlie Cornacchio.
The Just Sayin podcast is brought to you by New Leaf Hypnosis Center. At New Leaf, you'll be working with mindset coach and hypnotist Anthony Serino to overcome mental roadblocks holding you back from achieving your goals. Using a science-based and client-centered approach, Anthony will help you design the life you deserve. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Just Sayin podcast. It's great to have you with us today. How many of you have walked into a store and paid attention to the sounds of that store or a restaurant? Maybe the sounds of people talking or the cash register ringing or dishes clanging together, just down to the music being played. Well, the impact of sound on our ears and our behavior is the topic of today's discussion with our resident expert, Jodi Krangle. Jodi is a full-time voice actor, and she's been doing that since 2007. She's worked on a myriad of well-known companies that you know, like Dell and Frito-Lay's and Marriott, and we'll get into a lot of the others as well. She's also the host of an audio branding podcast and has some great insight on how businesses use sound to get their message across and get you to purchase products, and also how sound can affect us and steer us in a certain direction. So Jodi joins us on the podcast today. And Jodi, thanks so much from your sound booth. How are you?
Thanks for having me today. This is going to be fun. I'm good. I'm locked in my padded room.
Yeah, that's what it is. So for those of you who don't know, voiceover artists will construct a little studio in their home, and it's a booth. It's a real booth, but it's like, what is yours? Like dimension-wise, What is yours?
It's 5x4. So it's got a little room in here. Someone could actually stand behind me and they'd be perfectly fine. Like there's enough room for that. It's kind of neat.
Now,
I don't feel claustrophobic, at least.
When you first started doing voiceover work, were you using the in-home studio, or were you going somewhere to do it in like a recording studio?
Well, part of being a non-union actor and being your own boss is creating your own atmosphere. And that's true for anyone who's in any business, really. But when it comes to voice acting, you need a home studio. When I started in 2007, that was becoming more and more usual. And before that, maybe it hadn't been quite so usual. People were going a lot to studios, depending on where you were located. If you were in a big city center, then you knew there were tons of studios around you. I live outside of the city proper, and it's a real pain in the butt for me to get to a downtown studio. So out of necessity, I built my own home studio, and it started like with IKEA curtain rods in a square around me on the ceiling with like moving blankets hanging down that I could push away when I wasn't working. So I started small. Yeah, whatever works. I started small, and then eventually I did graduate to creating a booth that was mini. And I'm loving it.
Yeah.
It's been about, I think, 7 years now that I've had this booth.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I have a friend of mine who also does voiceover work, and she constructed a booth in her home as well. But when she started around that same time, I think everything was ISDN lines. Do you remember the old ISDN lines? So she was doing that. But the beauty of your business is that you can do it from home, and you can effectively connect with anyone throughout the world. And
it really has made this entirely possible. Yeah.
And almost do it with the client right at the other end, saying, you know what, can you just change the inflection on the word but, right?
Totally. Yeah. Live sessions, I do them all the time. And nowadays, instead of ISDN, they're using something called Source Connect. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a software program by a company called Source Elements. And it's essentially a software to software product rather than a hardware to hardware product like ISDN was. So it's cheaper. And because ISDN was copper wires and no one's using that anymore and they're getting rid of it. None of the telecommunications companies want to deal with it anymore.
Right. Sure.
Source Connect has become the thing that people are using.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into some of the interesting applications of sound and music and how powerful that all that can be and how it can influence us. But I want to first get into how you got into this field of audio performance.
Well, voice acting was not an acting thing for me. I didn't come at it from being a film or a theater actor. I came at it from being a singer, actually. So my background is in music, really. And in 1995-96, I volunteered my time at the CNIB, which is the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. And I was reading books onto tape. And at the time, it actually was reel-to-reel tape. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the tech almost as much as I enjoyed the speaking. So I knew then that I wasn't going to be intimidated by any of this work at home stuff,
Right.
which made it a little easier. It took me a while to switch my focus. I was already self-employed. I was doing SEO and internet marketing back in, I think I started in 95.
Wow.
And I ended up doing that right up until 2007. Basically, when Google became the only game in town and I got bored. And then it was more like I was already self-employed, so it was more like a focus shift. It wasn't really a whole entire life shift, if that makes sense.
Mhm. We had mentioned some of the companies that you've worked for, HDTV you've worked for, Target,
Mhm.
Siemens, Marriott, Nestle's. How did you come to work with these heavy hitters working from home as a non-union performer?
Well, a lot of them are people that I was auditioned for. I was auditioning for them through an agent and was lucky enough to land the job. I happened to be the voice they pictured in their head. And that's frequently how it happens. A lot of the heavier hitters of companies that will hire you are usually, well, not all the time, but a lot of the time they're through an agent.
Mm.
And I have several of them, so that's
Oh,
very helpful.
yeah.
But in a lot of cases, depending on how good your website is, people will just land on your website and hire you. And those are honestly, those are really good jobs because the people that are coming to your website have already really made up their mind. You're not auditioning for them. They've decided, they've already made the decision. Really, it's just talking about price at that point.
Right. You talk about how audio is a factor in business success. How so?
I think it impacts very strongly because our hearing is one of our strongest senses. That and the sense of smell are two of our most powerful senses. And in a lot of senses today, especially, we're inundated with the visual. We're all online now, right? We're all just overloaded with what we're seeing. And so when you can touch someone with a different sense, and hearing is the obvious one, you make a deeper impact and you become more memorable. And really, when you're talking about advertising and marketing, being memorable is the key because you could have a really clever campaign that's wonderful and people laugh at and they love to watch, but if they don't remember who the product was, that's not a functional commercial.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it doesn't serve the purpose it was meant to serve.
Yeah, and we see that in Super Bowl ads all the time, where people will say,
Yes.
"Oh, that
Yeah.
ad was so funny." Yeah, what was the product? I don't know, but the ad was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, but that's not a successful campaign then. I mean, as as a like a viral video, it might be a great thing.
Right,
But as a selling tool for the actual company, no, it's not doing what it was designed to do.
right. How exactly can music influence the buying behavior in a store or a boutique?
Yeah, it's strange. They've done a lot of studies on this. I link to it in my blog often. And they've discovered that if you, for instance, play French music in a wine store, people are more likely to buy French wine. If you play German music, they're more likely to buy German wine. There's music that's piped through malls, and the flavor of a mall can be told by the type of music that's piped in. Inside stores, you'll find that they have their own audio brand. Like if you go into a Hot Topic t-shirt, place, then it's likely to have a certain type of music. If you go into a high-end men's clothing store, it's likely to have a different type of music.
Right.
And a jewelry store is likely to have another different type of music. It depends on kind of the overall sensibility of what people have decided are, high-end, low-end, everyday, whatever people have decided in their heads. And this is kind of agreed upon in geographical locations. It's not necessarily a universal thing. Music is a universal language, but in different locations, you're likely to find different genres of music meaning different things to the people that hear it. And it's using that to your advantage to get people to understand what your brand is and relate with it. And in that sense, they're more likely to bond with you and purchase your product.
So in your example, then, if I go into a liquor store and the liquor store owner says, all right, listen, we're really trying to push this French wine, they might pump in French music to get people to steer towards that aisle?
I could see how it worked. I know they've done studies on it. Like this is actually a white paper that they did where they studied this, and it works. It's like they buy 70% more French wine if they hear French music.
Wow.
Also, when you're in a restaurant and you're experiencing the food of that restaurant, the music that they play sort of it informs your experience. So if you don't hear anything, people are a little wary, I guess, of places that are too quiet when you're having a dining experience. They want atmosphere. They don't want it to be so quiet that everyone can hear everyone else's conversation, right? Like there's a certain ambiance that you need to have in certain situations, and sound is a big part of that.
Yeah. I'm trying, it just popped in my head, but I thought of something that I heard or read a long time ago where somebody would pipe in people like kind of happy, laughing very slightly, or having very positive conversation. And that was to kind of create the ambiance. So if it wasn't already there, it just kind of subliminally, it wasn't loud, enough where you could detect it, but it was just kind of there. And if you weren't listening for it, you would just think that that was part of the room. I think that I had read that somewhere. Interesting stuff. How powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely, it is very powerful. And I think that in that sense, it almost becomes white noise that influences you.
Yeah, right. How did you know that you had a voice for radio, let's say?
Well, I've never been in radio, so I wouldn't. But as far as what I do, like I said, I've been a singer all my life. So that's really where I come at this from. And as far as the voice is concerned, I don't know that it matters what your voice sounds like, honestly, in voiceover. And if you don't have a major speech impediment, like if you do, then that's something you'd need to work on. But if you don't, then really any type of voice can be coached into doing whatever genre your voice is suited for. And really the market will decide what your voice is suited for.
Interesting point that I got off of your website. And it says that sound can help us time travel. Explain that.
Yeah. I actually got that from an interview that I was conducting with a fellow named John McClane.
Oh.
John McClane. Yes. Every time I say that name, it is his real name. He owns a studio in Las Vegas called Dog and Pony, and he is a sound designer, and he works with students at UNLV teaching a music and film course. So he's talked a lot about this and knows a lot about the whole sound and how it influences us idea. And he even makes the win sounds for slot machines. What he told me when we were talking was that sound is a quick way to time travel, because when you hear a sound that you recognize from your childhood, for instance, and it could be something as simple as the creak of a floorboard, and suddenly you remember walking through your childhood home, at a particular moment. Like you're there. It's so powerful that you're actually there. And scent does the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
That's how we know those two are our most powerful senses. And beyond that, it's really strange, but they have recently figured out that there's a brain connection between our scent and our hearing, between those two senses.
Interesting. On your website, you have some really good tips to use if you're a business owner. Tip number one, we'll go through these and then you could explain it for our audience. And we will give the website in a minute so you can also go to the website. But tip number one is to decide who you want to reach.
Yeah, that's the usual basics of marketing of any kind, or branding for that matter. You have to know who your avatar is. So you really do need to know who it is you're reaching out to, who your ideal client is.
Mhm.
And once you figure that out, then it kind of all falls into place.
Yeah.
But I take it in an audio context.
Yeah. Right. All right. Number two is to find your why.
Yeah. Why are you doing what you're doing? This is another context question in the idea of why someone would start a podcast. What do you want to get out there? What is your reason for doing what you're doing? It's not only to make money. I mean, that may be part of it.
Ain't that true, sister?
Yeah, that may be part of it. But if you're truly trying to reach people and get a message to them that you feel they need to know,
Right.
then what is that message? And why is it important to you? Why should it be important to someone else?
Yeah. Right. Tip number three, decide what media you want to focus on first. What do you mean by media?
Yeah. Well, if it's a commercial or it's a corporate narration that sits on your website, or if it's an ad in streaming media or on a podcast, or if it's in social media in the form of a video, or if you want to do a live stream, there are so many different ways of reaching your potential audience. But when you decide how you're going to do that and where you're going to do it, then it depends. That's going to allow you to figure out what you need to sound like to do that. So do you need background music? Do you need good recording equipment for video or not for video? Do you need a sound treated environment? Do you need sound effects? There's all sorts of different things that you would need audio wise to make that work. And you need to think about that.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be you. It could be who you hire.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but it's still something you need to think about.
Yeah, because I would think, in video production, which I've done a lot of, I've got 20 questions that I'll ask a client. And one of them is, what type of music do you like? What type of TV shows do you like? And we try and, drill down to what they want the final product to look like and do for them. So I get where you're coming from there.
Yeah, but it's also important that they understand what their avatar appreciates. So who are they trying to reach out to, and what do those people appreciate? What genres do you think they listen to?
Right.
What visuals do they respond to? You have to figure out also what your audience responds to, not just what you do, because branding and marketing are separate things. Who you are is your brand, but you're marketing to the people who want what your brand can deliver.
That's an excellent point. Branding and marketing are two different things. Excellent point. So, talking about branding, tip number 4 is identify your brand voice.
Yeah, and when I say voice in the very broad sense, so voice meaning what you sound like in general. And once you know who your client is, then you can also focus in on who you are, because when you connect authentically with the people that are hearing you or seeing you or whatever, you are making that connection more authentically. When you know who you are, then
Right.
you attract the people that are attracted to that.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing who you are is very important. So knowing your brand voice and what you're going to put out there is as important as knowing who your avatar is. Because how do you relate to them?
Yeah, right.
And how do they relate to you?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then tip number 5, places to look for sound effects and for voices.
Yeah, and I have a bunch of them listed on that document. But the idea being that for music, you can go to license-free directories. There are a bunch of those. And you can actually contact people who will write music for you. There are people who will create the whole audio experience for you. So it really depends on where on the spectrum you want to pay. Because
Yeah,
if you're getting something custom made for you, it's going to be a little more expensive, obviously.
right, right.
But at the same time, having an intro for a podcast created for you may not cost all that much. It depends on who you know and who you contact, and that's all stuff that you can work out. But there are companies out there that do audio branding. There are companies out there that create music for people, specially for whatever projects they're working on. And you can totally get in touch with them. I also, I think, include a directory for voice talent, which are vetted through our industry association, World Voices. So that link will help whoever this is get in touch with people who they know are professionals.
Mm-hmm. And it could make all the difference in the world. You might think to yourself, well,
Mm-hmm.
simple voiceover. I'll give you an example. Now, I have a friend of mine, this friend that I was talking about with the booth in her home. We used to play in a band together. So I've known her for, I don't know how many years, 25 years, whatever it was. And
Mm-hmm.
she got into doing voice performance and voiceovers, and she's done some magnificent things that are, national commercials and stuff like that. And I called her and said, hey, can you help me out with my podcast I'm starting and just create an open for me? I could have easily done it myself. I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
in TV. I've done that, but to have somebody else who's actually a professional at that makes a world of difference. It really does. So somebody like you
Yeah.
coming in and just something as simple as the introduction to somebody's podcast makes a
Mm-hmm.
world of difference. It elevates your level, I believe, of professionalism, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And a lot of the time, using a female voice with a male host can work very well in your favor.
Yeah, that's what I
And
thought.
the opposite can also be true. I don't think you necessarily have to ask someone to do your podcast intro and outro, but I do think that
No,
it can help.
yeah. And I should mention her name is Lori Naughton, because I don't know if she's listening
Mm-hmm.
to this podcast, but if she is, she'll then call me and say, this girl I know. No, I'm
Oh,
kidding.
yeah, you don't want to get in trouble.
No, she's a sweetheart. She wouldn't say that, but I just wanted to give her props. Has the virus affected your work in any way, shape, or form? Do you still have the same amount of work, or did you get less work for a while? Or
It's been really interesting in that before this happened, the voice type that a lot of people were asking for was millennial, younger, really super authentic, like almost not even a voice actor. And then when COVID hit, it was like all of a sudden, we want warm and friendly, authoritative, but still approachable, like this kind of direction, right? All of a sudden, because like that kind of thing happens, like when world wars happen, when 9/11 happened, people want comfort.
yeah,
And so if you happen to have a voice print that approaches that type, then you're going to benefit.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
And luckily I kind of do.
yeah,
so
right.
so for me it's been I feel bad for everybody. This is a horrible situation and I would never have wished for this to be the reason for it, but I am doing quite fine.
Yeah, good.
Because of that. And the industries have shifted a little bit. I used to do a lot of tourism and hospitality and that kind of thing. And that's all gone away because no one's doing that anymore.
Mm,
But healthcare, finance, insurance, all of these things are picking up like crazy. So what I lost with one bunch of industries, I gained with a bunch of others. And all of these messages need to be shared. So especially the healthcare ones, my goodness. So as much as this wouldn't have been my choice as to why it happened, I'm certainly benefiting from it. I can't deny that.
If somebody wanted to get into the
Mhm.
business that you're in and they wanted to do voiceovers, what would be your suggestion of how to get into it and what kind of equipment would they need to do that?
Well, for starters, I would say go to a website called voiceoverextra.com. And it's voiceoverxtra.com, because you'll find all sorts of articles about the business, about the performance, about coaches that are reputable, about webinars that you can participate in or watch after the fact for like $50. They're not expensive. You can see what the lay of the land is before you decide to invest in this, because it is an investment, not only in your equipment, but in your coaching, in your website, and any media you produce. All of this is going to be an investment. Demos, for instance, can cost upwards of $2,000 plus. It's pricey.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, you can get them for cheaper. You can, but you want to make sure that you work with someone who makes spots or does whatever that demo is supposed to demonstrate every day. Because if it doesn't sound like it could be real, you're not going to be a working voice actor. Put it that way.
Yeah. All right. The podcast is Audio Branding Podcast. There's a graphic there for you. And the website is voiceoversandvocals.com. And you can get a lot of information there for Jodi and what she's doing, and maybe advice for what you could do to help promote your business, to help use audio to kind of generate the types of emotions you want to convey, or purchases you want, people behavior, whatever it is. But Jodi, you bring up some really interesting points about audio and how effective it could be, and that a lot of times we don't even know that it's affecting us, but that it is, and that's very interesting to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate you being here, and good luck with everything up there in Toronto, and stay safe. And we look forward to
Thank you so much.
hearing you on the airways.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate your having me on the show. It was fun.
All right. We'll talk soon. Anyway, that will do it for this edition of the Just Sayin podcast. Make sure that you never miss an episode of the Just Sayin podcast with Charlie Cornacchio by subscribing, or you could also find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any podcast platform that you get your podcasts from, or on YouTube and Facebook for the video version of the podcast. Make sure to download or order my book, How I Met My Mother and the Four Brothers I Never Knew I Had. And you can get that through Barnes & Noble or wherever you download your books. That will do it for this edition. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and be kind. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Just Sayin podcast.